Welcome to Can I Trust You? Building Customer Trust into Better Experiences, presented by SAP. I'm Mike G, Consulting Editor with Which50, and I'll be your host for the next hour as we try to help you understand how trust in business is a currency that has value and is fundamental to financial growth in the experience-driven economies we see today. The good news is that brands can absolutely create trust dynamics with their customers and staff by understanding some simple neuroscience principles and designing experiences accordingly. Part of our discussion today will explore those principles and experiences. Before I introduce the panel, let's start with a question. Why has trust returned to the center of the customer experience conversation? After all, trust has always been at the core of the buyer-seller relationship, but perhaps something was lost in the last decade in the rush to transform and disrupt. Today, however, it is the watchword on the tongue of board and C-suite executives. While it feels like there's a critical need in modern business to gain the customer's trust, and then to keep it, once upon a time, trust was a simple matter of trust. But today, we find ourselves at a nexus point in the trust debate. Over the past few years, big corporations and governments have failed the trust test in many ways. Here in Australia, many financial institutions have had all kinds of bad behaviour exposed by the Banking Royal Commission, and major automobile companies misled the public about emissions ratings. Globally, the black mark of failure spans companies involved in industries as diverse as consumer credit, social media and social networking, and hospitality. Governments and politicians are seen to manipulate data and the news cycles regularly to sway public opinion, election results, and policy decisions. Simply put, trust in major institutions is at an all-time low and probably getting lower by the day. And then there's technology. Today, however, it is the watchword on the tongue of board and C-suite executives. With the advent of the World Wide Web and the digital revolution, suddenly it seems that everybody, consumers, buyers, businesses, governments, are running scared even more. That is because, as the technology got bigger, better, faster, something extraordinary emerged. Data, lots of it. The more you had, the more valuable it became. Data became both the big good and the big bad. People trusted businesses to look after their data, much of it rather personal, and to use it for the customer's advantage. Unfortunately, that hasn't always happened, hence a new level of concern for organizations, and in some ways, the core of the trust question. Can you look after my data securely as a customer, whether it be an individual or business? And then, what are you planning to do with it? So how do we consider trust? The answer, according to our experts, is neurological in nature and operates at multiple levels, so brands need to execute consistently on each. The first level of trust is foundational. Customers expect organizations to be able to collect, manage, and protect their data at both a technical level and at a policy level. This reflects both an organization's ability to secure data and its philosophical approach to which data it collects and how it treats the privacy of that data. Successful delivery at this foundational level will provide customers with the control they need to feel like they are an equal partner in the relationship, assuming that's what is wanted. The second level is experiential. Customers provide organizations with information about themselves, either explicitly or implicitly through their interactions. The value exchange they expect is that organizations will provide them with seamless and easy to use products and services that most accurately match their requirements and desires. This value exchange extends beyond simply data, although this is critical. Just as important for this layer is the provision of contemporary and coherent interactions between channels such as sales, service, online and mobile, for example. The third level, reputational. Customers need to trust organizations to do the right thing by them. For instance, if a customer is due a refund, they should not have to search or work for it. The organization should know this is already due to the sophistication of its system and deliver the outcome. This mirrors our human relationships. To deliver across any or all these levels, organizations need sophisticated contemporary technology, and that technology should enable the organization to understand and leverage the relationship between both the operational and experiential data it holds on consumers and its customers. But, and this is important, technology is not enough. The organization also needs a culture which places the customer experience front and center, and which is supported by policies and processes which deliver this outcome. To achieve these outcomes, businesses and governments need to implement robust, highly flexible information architectures that successfully exploit both operational and experiential data in a way that ensures the very best experiences for customers and prospects, and does so in an environment where respecting the value of a customer's personal data is critical. So, before I introduce the panel, please note there will be an audience questions and answer session following the main discussion, so please send your questions in over the next 20 minutes. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce that panel and what a distinguished lineup we have. Sitting actually in the room next to me and on my left is the co-founder and CMO of Xinja Bank, Camilla Cooke, who comes from the new world of digital banking, where there is no shop front and trust has some very different and also some very familiar perspectives. Luke Shaw is head of e-commerce at Sigma Healthcare and has to deal with trust in three sectors, with franchise partners who are running the pharmacies in the digital space with the consumer directly, and also the company's suppliers. Aaron Spinley is a researcher and growth strategist at SAP. The author of many online papers, including most recently Space and Time in a Fast-Moving World and Why the Most Trusted Brands Will Also Be the Most Successful, Aaron is a noted expert in the whole trust question. And as to Aaron, I'm turning to you first with a question I've been asked by several executives over the last few months. Why has trust suddenly become such a big issue, Aaron?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a question I get a lot as well. Firstly, Mike, thank you for doing such a great job of introducing this subject because it is so multifaceted. And thanks for having me here today. It's important that we don't underestimate what we're dealing with here. The demise of trust is a global phenomenon and it's truly inhibiting economic growth. So this isn't just a buzzword. And in fact, the UN Secretary General has said that our world is suffering from a bad case of what he calls trust deficit disorder. He said that trust is at a breaking point and that trust in national institutions, trust among states, and trust in the rules-based global order is all under threat. And we see this, right? You think about the rise of fake news or the increasing tribalism in politics, or how we don't trust Facebook or Google anymore. So to your question, why is this happening now? Well, it's very much part of a wider evolution in society. And we've seen this accelerating for some time, but none more so than in the last decade. If you look at consumption behavior, this typically mirrors societal attitudes and expectations, right? So, when we think about social sciences, we've seen the rise of specific strains of human bias that impact our worldviews. And this affects how we behave. And now we base what we believe in, believe it or not, more on how we feel than based on the hard data or even on traditional systems of faith. So let me put it another way. We now think and behave differently. And so the demise of trust is not isolated. It's married to these kinds of societal shifts that we're studying and monitoring. And it's become such an issue much more in our recent history than we've seen before.
Thanks, Aaron. That's a great answer. And I think there's already a lot to think about in there because we are talking about this at a very human level. And I think Aaron stresses that this is a very human issue. I want to turn to Camilla now because I know we've spoken before that as a neobank, you believe we're entering a new era of trust. And it's about three things. Can you tell us all about how that trust question has changed and what those three things are?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And the three key things when it comes to banking and trust are essentially, the trust used to be about, will you lose my money or not? Fundamentally, we were concerned, is it safer in the bank than under the mattress? And that actually disappeared with the GFC in Australia. And the reason for that was because of the financial claims scheme. Essentially, the government said, we will underwrite any bank, anything that calls itself a bank, to the tune of $250,000 per customer. Now, that applies to anyone who is a bank. So it doesn't matter whether you're Xinja or CBA or ANZ, we get the same bank guarantee. So I would argue, or the government guarantee, I should say, I would argue that that aspect of trust is kind of taken care of. It's tick, everyone's the same, so long as you are a bank. The other two areas are connected to data. And I think there are two facets to that. One is, can I trust you to look after my data, not to lose it? And cybersecurity is a massive and escalating problem. And I think that the there is major concern there. We were just doing a review of this week, and I think all major banks in this country have had some form of data breach this year. We saw Capital One in the US lose inadvertently or be hacked to the tune of 100 million customer records. Now, that's scary. It's scary when you're talking about identity theft, which is a major problem within that. That's just personally identifiable information, but it's also very scary when you're talking about financial data. So data security for a bank is, I would argue, more important than for any other organization. So I often get asked as a new bank, oh, but you know, how secure are you? And actually, to some extent, the new banks have an advantage because we built security in state-of-the-art 21st century security in from day one. So we started with a fresh canvas. We're not trying to bolt on additional padlocks on an old house. We actually had it inherent in the structure of the building from the beginning. So arguably, we've got an advantage. But that's just data security. The third aspect and the other key component of data, trust around data is, do I trust you to use my data on my behalf as opposed to your own? And I think what we've seen to date and what the Royal Commission showed brought into stark relief was, until now, banks have essentially used customers' data in their own interests. They've used it in order to bluntly cross-sell them products when they've anticipated a need, or to understand their own opportunities better. They haven't used them to serve the customer. And the open data movement, of which, of course, open banking is a facet and arguably the first cab off the rank, is about that shift from the power of data, the benefit of data for the corporate, but shifting to the benefit of the owner of that data, the consumer. And I think that is where the new trust for banks will become manifest, is when customers can see that the bank is actually deploying the customer's data and using that data to improve that customer's financial situation. And it's not really manifest yet, but it is the agenda of the neobanks. And with the potential accelerant of open banking, I think we will see it happening.
That's fascinating because, you know, the neobanks are the tip of the trust change and this trust revolution. But a man who's sitting at the very core of traditional is Luke Shaw, because the pharmacy industry is about as traditional as it gets at its core, a bricks and mortar face-to-face experience. Luke, you faced the problem of both moving with the times and operating on 3 different levels. Tell us about the issues you faced in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think pharmacy would like to think that it is trying to evolve, and certainly the consumers are. They fall for us into 2 distinct categories. There is definitely that traditional older store shopper or patient, but that digital group is emerging and increasing in size. So the people and attitudes are changing and evolving, but the process and the technology remains a traditional and digital mix in our stores, you know, essentially the same as our customers. So collecting and storing the data is done securely for our customers or consumers and patients in pharmacy operating systems, which are a traditional mixture of literally the padlock in a locked drawer, and then evolving into that digital space as well, especially as Australia moves into the My Health record and the digital sharing of scripts. So physically, our scripts are kept in restricted areas away from non-essential staff and locked with the medicines away. And there's an actual physical barrier within stores, you know, that it's with the pharmacists up and away and sort of out of sight. And so that trust is reinforced when you place a script with that pharmacist and they take it out the back and make it up for you. So that element gives us a visible assurance of trust and control over personal data in store. And we're trying to obviously leverage that into that digital space. So the digital systems within pharmacy are fully, you know, have credentialed access, and each system is locked down to the needs of a specific user, whether that's the dispensary technician, the pharmacist, or a shop girl, you know, heavily monitored and regulated and personalised to ensure that that data is only seen by the people that need to see it. And then physical machines are hidden as well. So that helps, you know, drive that not only perception of safety, but obviously the real element of trust. Each employee signs patient confidentiality agreements. It is very much a medical professional environment, and the responsibilities are known and made clear to those staff. And the continued education into the requirements of the digital record is the bit that is changing and evolving. But essentially they apply the same methodologies to a piece of paper or to data as they do to a piece of paper. So the My Health records and electronic records for our stores, encryption exists and it's managed in line with the Australian Government Protective Policy Framework. So that's a relatively new piece of documentation that's going to be applied directly to pharmacy. And our systems that integrate with those government systems follow these guidelines, obviously incredibly closely. So we've already got a high level of trust in this space. Pharmacists, depending on which study you read, are the second most trusted profession in the world. So continuing to show that professionalism maintains that trust level from our perspective. The experiential level, I guess we're using SAP Hybris has allowed us to heavily personalise the experience for our stores. Fundamentally, we're a wholesaler into those pharmacies. So we're giving them their own banners, their own colours, personalising their experience in buying from us. Customised communication preferences and content gives them the sense that the platform they're using with us is theirs. And so there's that inherent trust level with that as well. Each store wants to order differently from us, so we've had to design a site in the technical space to perform how they wanted it and drive their user experience. So essentially they see that technology and the relationship with Sigma as theirs. They trust their own instance, that's sort of implicit, and it's shaped for them in a way that they like. So their preferred ordering style, preferred products, communication, volumes and channels. And that reputational trust grows from there because we're trying to do the right thing by them in a way that they want to deal with us. So we gave them increased reporting clarity, self-service for queries, increased resolution speed when they did have issues in dealing with us specifically. And the key element to that for us was using the Qualtrics platform, which has allowed us to quickly identify any issues or perhaps chinks in that trust armour and act on that feedback, whether it's negative or positive. And then show them the changes that we've made and how they've been executed. We had a 10-point jump in a Net Promoter Score earlier this year when we actually went out to the customer base and said, what are the three main things you want to see? We executed on those. We built them for those customers and then went back and showed them that the feedback they were giving us, the requests they had were actually being acted on. So that's really sort of built that final stage of reputational trust for us.
Excellent. Thank you. It's a very decent answer. I think you've actually answered two questions I had for you in one there. So I'm going to skip your next question. I'm going to go to Camilla. Sure. You recently published a fascinating article about personalization, which I didn't know a lot about, I have to admit. What do you mean by personalization? Where does it all fall in place in this concept of the trust dividend?
So personalization is something I've worked in for years, and essentially all it means is using data you hold on someone to determine to customize the message to them. Now, as a marketer, it's been around for a long time. The technology's been there for a very long time. It's been manifest mostly in the marketing arena. But what we're beginning to see now, and I'm not the only one coining this phrase, is personalization as a service. This is incredibly relevant in financial services, and it's an example of what I meant by using data in a customer's interests. For example, if you come to a bank and you say, I'd like to borrow some money, the bank has to look at you and assess you and decide your credit risk. Now, this is done in a slightly clunky way, often to do with cohorts and external suppliers, but more and more banks have the facility. If they have watched your financial behavior, they now are more and more have the capability, arguably they've had the capability for years but have chosen not to use it, to analyze the risk according to actual behavior as opposed to some notion of your cohort derived from a postcode or some other extraneous piece of information. And there are very clear indicators of your reliability. For example, in the US, they worked out that the clearest indicator of someone's reliability in terms of repayments over a loan was actually their telco history. Now, if you've got access to someone's transaction account, you can see the regularity with which they pay their phone bill. You can use all other items of data to feed an algorithm that would enable you to go, actually, you're a low credit risk, therefore I'm going to give you a low interest rate on this loan, for example. So the very same technology I've been using for 20 years just to personalize content in emails or to determine which piece of creative someone sees is essentially the same technology that could make decisions and communicate those decisions about the fact that we're going to give you a personalized rate. So in other words, we're going to treat you as an individual, not as a cohort. And we're going to, for example, work out your risk and give you an interest rate based on your level of risk. And as we monitor your behavior, and if your behavior continues to be reliable or even gets more reliable or we become more confident, we can lower that interest rate further. So the personalized interest rate actually for both borrowing and saving is perfectly possible. And it's actually a win-win for the bank and the customer because it is based on their behavior. We've seen it, it's already been pioneered in insurtech rather than fintech. We've seen people attach gadgets to their cars that we get these ridiculous kind of insurance rates based on you're a 25-year-old male, you must be reckless. You're a 60-year-old female, you must be careful. These are simply ridiculous generalizations, and good drivers get penalized in the process. And we've already seen the insurance industry, allow people to monitor their own driving, and your rate goes up or down depending on how fast you take a corner, how quickly you accelerate, and obvious things like the amount of driving you do. So it's proper calculated rate based on a proper assessment of risk. This is where consumers' data can be used to their advantage, and we could have a much fairer system that benefits both parties. You're reducing risk on the one side and you're reducing costs on the other. So it makes perfect sense.
So you're actually trusting me to be good?
I'm not trusting you to do anything because I can look at your behavior and I can, if you have a dynamic personalized interest rate, if your behavior changes, so can the rate. So I think that personalized rates is one example of what we're calling, personalization as a service. And as things like general commodities like bank accounts and savings accounts and all the artifacts of product that financial services have imposed on us traditionally, in a way that becomes less and less relevant. And I think the real competition, the real area of competition between banks will be the quality of personalized service we deliver to our customers. And with the arrival of open banking, what will happen is customers are going to be able to move banks far more easily. And we like to think, optimistically perhaps, that it will be something that our CEO calls the race to the top. In other words, that will be the battleground. It will be, how can I give this customer a better and better service and actually prove to them that I'm using their data to help them make more out of their money? That will become how we're assessed as banks.
That's fascinating. Luke, we'll skip that question I have down for you and I'll get back to you in a moment. Aaron, I want to talk to you about digital transformations, because there are a lot of businesses that are undergoing digital transformations at the moment. I think a lot of the people out here listening to this webinar are involved in businesses doing so. So how does a business that's approaching a digital transformation include trust with what it's doing? What are the key things they should be considering as they transform? And most importantly, because I know you have a very strong answer on this, is it as complicated as it superficially appears?
Yeah, look, I think this is a subject now that there's a lot of noise around, right? And so I think the good news overall is that no, it's not as complicated as many like to make it sound. I mean, first of all, if you want to bake a cake, you need to know what the cake is before you choose your ingredients, right? So if you want to create trust, you need to know what it is. And trust is a very human trait. It's not strategy. It's not technology. Trust is actually neurological. And so the question really becomes, how do we as brands in a market Or how does we, as leaders, even in our organizations, trigger that neurological response in others? And so the answer is kind of remarkably simple, in that trust is gained, and we know this through our own human relationships. Trust is gained by getting the basics right every single time over the long haul. Think about, and I often talk to audiences about this when I speak, think about the last time you went to a conference, right? You entered an auditorium, picked out a spot to sit with your colleagues, and you just sat down. You didn't think about it. Now, if that chair had collapsed on you, you would have been sprawled on your back, legs in the air, mobile phone flying through the air, battered and bruised and embarrassed in front of a whole bunch of strangers. But even with your very dignity and well-being on the line, you didn't even think about it. You just sat. Why is that? It's because we've been conditioned, right? We sit on chairs thousands and thousands and thousands of times, whether we're at the dining table or on the sofa at home or in the office in a boardroom. It could be in an Uber, on an airplane, at a stadium. The things that we sit on hold us up. And this is this notion that's called structural assurance and situational normality. It's this notion that when something happens all the time, it goes from being something we think about in our high cognitive state to being something that's just subconscious. And so the key for every brand really is, how do you get to that point? How do you become so reliable in the ways that you always meet your brand promise? And how do you do that, to Camilla's point, in a meaningful way to those customers? It's not really about this notion of delightful experiences. In the CX world, everyone loves to talk about creating delight, but that's kind of the peak point of cognitive engagement. We don't live our relationships at a peak point of cognitive engagement. It's not where we form trust. So when we think about where we start, is we have to lay a foundation first. And I always say to people, it's kind of three things, particularly for organizations, to your point, Mike, that are considering transformation. What does that really look like if you boil it down to the fundamentals? And so I say the first thing is to make sure that you know what the baseline expectations of your customers are, right? Because if you don't know what that is, how do you meet them constantly, every day, all the time without fail? Because you can't afford to be the chair that collapses. Once a chair collapses on you, you'll never sit with the same confidence that you have before, because it's broken that conditioning that you had. So how do you know that you're meeting your baseline expectations? And then when you know what those expectations are, the second one is obviously you commit to that baseline, and you commit to doing it every time without fail. And the third piece is that, as we mentioned before, society is rapidly changing. And what that means is that our consumption behaviors and our expectations are changing with that. And as you do that, as a brand, you need to be aware of it. So the third piece is proactively level setting constantly. Where are my customers and what are their expectations, so that you don't get left behind in that equation. It's been said that we earn trust in drops, right? And so really, I always bring this back to a focus on the basics. We talked about earlier, Mike, foundational, experiential, reputational, and it's about doing it over the long haul. This isn't a short-term campaign. This is about a culture, and it's longitudinal in nature.
Excellent. I think that's a very key message, isn't it? That it's sorry. That's the old, I've got my mic off. Luke, your business underwent a massive business transformation. How did you bring those three arms together technologically? And what advice would you offer to other organizations embarking on similar journeys? Because it is, as we just heard, a big journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say we certainly haven't finished the transformation by any means. It's definitely an evolution rather than a revolution. But fundamentally, it comes down to three things, right? It's around the people, the process, and the technology to facilitate those things. So historically, our technology had evolved in silos to we end up with many different systems to achieve similar things. So right now we're looking at a very much a consolidation phase to try and bring those all the disparate systems to reduce them down to something that is a bit more manageable. Fundamentally, for our wholesale ordering platform was out of date by a long way, and we invested in SAP to to deliver a better experience and help build trust with our franchise partners. But it was the first product that we built with an agile model, and it's given us the flexibility to evolve as we've developed the experience for our franchise partners. A new one for Sigma that we tended to historically, chase the new shiny bauble, and that agile model allowed us to sort of pivot and navigate the technology to appease the appetite for change, but with an organisation that has a history of challenging technical problems. And so we gave the people of the business, a clear mandate that the system that we were building wasn't going to facilitate poor process, and that this technology essentially gave us an opportunity to have a look at how these processes had evolved, and the owners of those, and if they were any good. And then we could they could go away and improve that process, and then we could build it into the technology and automate it. But that light shone on entrenched processes, showed that the organisation exactly where sort of old issues lie, or where we'd hiding them, and ultimately where technology could give an improvement. That obviously helped build trust within the organisation, because the technology could evolve to actually deliver a better process, deliver a better experience, to make things easier, to make them, to do what technology does, right? It should make our jobs easier and clearer and faster. And so we used, regular 3 to 4 week releases and again, went back to the business and said, you asked for X and we've delivered it, go and use it and tell us what you think. And we can continue to evolve. And so we were making those changes in a good way. We weren't trying to boil the ocean and solve the world's problems, but evolving the change and evolving the platform to give a great experience. So that shows the people that the change we're making is a good one, and builds the trust within the organisation.
Thanks, Luke. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Camilla, you have an advantage over a lot of people. You've got zero legacy. You have no legacy systems. That's a very big advantage. Poor Luke's sitting on the end there. He's got them all over the place.
Absolutely.
Well, lots of people out here have got them all over the place. So what advantages have you got? What advantage does this give you?
Okay, so it's a fresh canvas. I think there's a few key things. Number one is cost. If you look at the big four, I seem to remember before CommBank did a major upgrade of their core banking system, they were spending something like 1.5 billion a year maintaining it. The legacy systems we're seeing in the big banks are, some of them about 30 years old. And there is code in there that hasn't been touched for years, written in languages that the people who know how to write it are either dead or have Alzheimer's. So every time they do a release, they don't know what's going to happen. This is why they do so few, because it's so scary, is they don't know if the whole thing's going to break. And there are programmers who won't go in there, it's too risky. So the fact is that I think that whole cranky system, sort of clunky system they had, as I say, cost about 1.5 billion a year to run at the time. A core banking system, cloud-based core banking system like the one we've just deployed, which I'm happy to say is SAP's first core banking system deployed completely in the cloud. The bare essentials cost about $20,000 a month to run. So the financial differential is absolutely enormous. Now, that's not going to benefit us to begin with, because we're a newcomer. We've just launched our bank account, and there's a huge amount of infrastructure we have to build playing catch up. So can we pass on huge benefits to customers yet? No, but we will in the future, because as we scale, our fundamental costs will be fundamentally lower, and that will enable us to pass on the cost savings in the form of low fees, no fees, better interest rates, or lower interest rates in the case of borrowing to our customers. So the customers will start to reap the benefit of that over time. They will also reap the benefit of our maneuverability. So we can start to integrate services with a speed and a smoothness that I don't think the big four could ever, deploy. They could, but it would take such radical transformation of not only their systems, but also their business to move like that, we think we have a competitive advantage to begin with. So there is a much lower cost and there is a far greater technological potential. And I think those, are the key benefits. And the other advantage of it is partly cultural, in that we can deploy an agile methodology, we can bring our customers in to help us design the bank. And in terms of trust, that can then feed back. The more the customers are involved in the process, the more we can deliver, we can build trust with our customers. And the proof of the pudding is really in the eating when it comes to building a new bank. And in fact, just building on what we were talking about earlier, I think the key thing, and as a marketer, is in a way I need to do myself out of a job. What we don't want to do with trust is say, trust me. Never say that you're brave. Never say that you care. Never say that you have any nobility. That is what someone else ascribes to you. And therefore, as a marketer, my job is to build the message into the product and actually to prove it every day with everything we do, that it is in how we behave towards that person that they build trust. We have very little trust right now. We are brand new. Why should anyone trust us? We have to earn it, and it will be earned through the service we deliver. It will not be earned through any tagline I can put on the side of a bus. That is not how we're going to win this battle.
And I guess that's true of all the neobanks, isn't it? That they have to earn this trust, that it's okay to say, yes, we're here, we haven't got any shop fronts, we can do all this stuff, but they're still going to have to earn a lot of trust, because the banking industry isn't that thing. It's quite funny. One of our people out there, Glenn, commented he doesn't have Alzheimer's, but he does have a pulse, but he won't ever go back into COBOL programming, and I don't think any of us will ever go back into COBOL programming, Glenn, or DOS or anything remotely like it, frankly. Aaron, let's talk about the future instead of COBOL programming, which is a horribly freaky thing to even think about. It seems to me from a lot of people I've spoken to that a big question, which appears difficult to answer, is where does this whole trust equation go next? What's your best guess?
Yeah, well, look, again, it's about taking that wider lens again, isn't it? I mean, society, we know, will continue to evolve. The only thing we do know that is a constant is change. And this will apply here as well. I loved what Camilla just said about, the way that you earn trust through the experiential nature of engaging with people rather than like a logo on a bus or something. And a lot of my work is around trying to bring people back to human relationships and bringing brands back to remembering that they're engaging with humans. We don't go home to the people that we love the most in our lives, walk in the door and announce how great we are every day to make sure that they feel like they trust us, right? That stuff happens because we come home on time, that we're part of the family, that we take the rubbish out on Saturday mornings, that we walk the dogs in the winter when it's cold. It's the acts of service that engage a human into a trusted relationship. So where will this go? Well, look, what we do know is that will be a constant. The human neurology of trust will be a constant, but the way that we engage to it will change. So for instance, we're seeing a lot of latent demand now for transparency around the use of data. I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Mike, particularly in terms of consumers being able to engage almost in a partnership basis with brands around what happens with their data. In fact, the competition regulator in Australia, the AAAC, has just released a report which is scathing on how companies are using data from loyalty programs with next to no regard really for the consent of the customers to use that data in the ways that they're doing so. So my view is that's not long before that becomes just another baseline expectation. It's set in our heartbeat of society, but it becomes an expectation from all consumers and all customers in all industries. And so it's just one example of how that bar is moving and the types of things that we'll see in the future. The next decade, in my opinion, will be driven, when we think about growth strategy, by identity, which powers things like AI, but you've got to get identity right. And so this is probably one of the great challenges around CX and brand engagement and digital ecosystems and such like in the next 2 or 3 years, I think, around how you get identity right. Because without that, we can't meet the promise of some of the new emerging tech. So there's another example of how what the future might look like. But again, it's all about this infinite loop we're living in, really, right? Where it's referred to as digital Darwinism, where the technology and society are evolving faster than businesses can naturally adapt to it. So you always have to boil it back to the core basics around what trust is, and having a focus on that. We discussed before that trust will always be triggered in humans when we meet their basic expectations time and time again. So where's it going next? Big question, right? And always tough to answer. But for brands that don't have a real focus on meeting those expectations genuinely, I think the market will punish them. And we've already seen that. Open banking was a good example given around more consumer choice coming into the market. We see that in utilities industry as well, with power of choice movement. And of course, those in retail have known that reality for a long time. But for those brands that do keep clued in to where the bar is and are committed to understanding that evolution, and then have that relentless focus on delivering against the basics brilliantly, will absolutely create brand trust, and they'll absolutely be economically rewarded for it.
Fascinating answer, mate. Very, very nice. While we've all been chatting and I think giving you a lot to think about out there, we've got some questions that have come in, so I'm going to open these up to the panel. I'm going to start with a comment and a question from Glenn. Glenn comments that Bendigo and RSAQ are two examples of highly trusted brands, and both have their own digital strategies, but also enjoy face-to-face engagements with their customers and members. Trust is hard to win. Historically is earned and kept predominantly through face-to-face engagements. So Glenn asks, so how do digital-only organisations overcome the lack of personal engagements?
I would argue that at Xinja, we are committed, and we often say this, to use technology to bring humanity back to banking. Sounds like an oxymoron. The reality is that our organisation was founded by Eric Wilson, and he was inspired actually by his father-in-law, who he'd observed in a prior era of banking, being a regional bank manager in rural Australia. And he gently and kindly guided people that he knew locally in the community to make better financial decisions. And somewhere along the way, that reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationship has become adversarial, and there are various reasons for that. And what the neobanks are trying to do is do that in reverse. Now, we're not going to do that by hiring a whole load of kindly looking old men and distributing them around the geography. We're going to do that with technology, and that's where it comes back to hyper-personalized service. Hyper-personalized service, understanding people's data, is a form of listening. I would argue that there is a generational shift here as well. I think there is a generation that doesn't trust any digital interaction. I think there's a generation that's grown up with it. And millennials, apocryphally, would rather go to the dentist than to the bank. They don't go to the bank. That's not how they build trust. There are people say to me, but what are you going to do with people who want to meet someone face to face? I said, nothing. They can continue to bank with whoever they're banking with. We're not intending to create a bank for 100% of the population, regardless of their age. But we do think there's a very large percent of the population that actually do trust the digital channels, and that's how they operate. They're irritated by telephones. They want to chat. That is their chosen medium. We're living in a different world, and I don't think the idea that the only thing that is trustworthy is a physical human being. The appalling behavior of the big four, who have tens of thousands of staff, did nothing to save the consumer for really bad behavior. So I think there are a body of people, not everyone, but there is a large body of people who have a different balanced scorecard when it comes to evaluating on trust. And I think that going back to, I think it will come down to the value that you deliver. And if you look at digital trust as a phenomenon, Airbnb is one of the most successful brands on the planet right now. And arguably, that is an incredible exchange of trust. You're going to turn up someone's going to walk through your front door and live in your house or your property. I mean, the fact that the whole population has jumped into being landlords is a major leap of faith. So I think that to say that you can't inculcate trust digitally is not correct for a vast portion of the population.
I think, Luke, you would have a perspective on that too, because I guess the pharmacy industry, you have that same digital divide in the sense that you have a lot of baby boomer generation people who want to go into the pharmacy, stand there, see the man in the white coat, and go through the whole process they've gone through. And then you've got this brand new technological generation, if you like, which would much prefer to go online, get their script sorted, maybe walk in or have it sent out to them or whatever else. How do you deal with that?
Absolutely. So our click and collect model is catering for that second group of people. It's grown to just over 40% of our online orders now are click and collect. And what we're trying to educate our pharmacists who still sort of sit in that traditional, care and face-to-face feedback and building trust that way model, saying, look, they're coming in for products they think are right for them. You guys have the experience and the training, and now you have the time. You don't have to take the transaction. That bit's already been done. You have the time to ask those people, those new digital consumers, if we're putting them into that boat, how they're feeling, and really get to the heart of why they're visiting. Now, not every time they want to have a chat, not every time they want to divulge their personal health issues, but the fact that they're in the store, is new in itself. The people are coming into a store, and that is the pharmacist's opportunity to start building the face-to-face trust that the good experience in that digital space has given to drive them into the store in the first place. So it's definitely a balancing act. Certainly, when it does come to health, there is a large group, and the majority of people do want, at least at a semi-regular basis, that personal and personalised face-to-face feedback from a medical professional. But there is definitely a faster-paced environment these days. People, most of our online orders are done after 6 p.m. when the majority of pharmacies are shut. And if they can go in and pick it up on the way to work the next day, that is giving us an opportunity to have those consumers in our network, see the medical and the health feedback that pharmacists can give, that that perhaps they haven't been in a pharmacy since they were a child. I know I didn't go into a pharmacy between the ages of 12 and 29 until I had children and had to go back and reconnect with that professional. So it's about balancing. The pharmacists absolutely want to deliver better health solutions face to face, but that digital experience is helping a younger and a group of customers and patients, who will be patients in the future, come in and be part of our experience and start building the trust with their local pharmacist.
Camilla, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add an important part about the face-to-face is, I think the other component one should remember that is catered for through digital channels is the human-to-human. So we save an enormous amount of money by not having branches and not having extended huge sort of numbers of staff at Xinja, where we do invest heavily, one, in technology, and secondly, in customer support. So our ratio of numbers of staff to people contacting us is going to be good. And we think that's actually really important. Going back to bringing humanity back to banking, one of the biggest frustrations, ironically, that we found researching our customers they had with the traditional banks was the human interaction they had on the phone. They got stuck in bad systems, people put them through to the wrong department, the department cut them off or didn't know who they were often offshore, they didn't understand the accent they were hearing. There were all sorts of frustrations that customers experienced. And I think that what we're going to see is the more digital the company, the more probably they will invest in improving that customer experience. And we will see that there is an element of the population, and this is regardless of age, who say, I don't want to speak to a bot, for example. I want to speak to a human being. And one of the crucial things is going to be lots of companies will deploy bots. I think the ones that will succeed will be the ones that give someone the option to flick to a human at any moment and through any channel. And that feeling that somebody is there and somebody is listening is going to be maintained. And the people who do that well, I think will succeed. I spoke to a software company the other day via chat somewhere in North America, and I was thinking it was a very good exchange, and something crossed my mind, and I said into the chat box, "Excuse me, do you mind me asking, are you a human being?" And the response came back, "LOL, yes I am, my name's Virginia." And then a hesitation and another response saying, "Well, that's what the developer told me to say." So I think we are going to have moments where the Turing sort of law will be, it will get very close to whether we can recognize who we're talking to. But I think the brands that succeed will build out more humanity, but not just face-to-face.
That's great. Great point there. We've got one other question here, which we'll quickly get to, from Scott. He asks, and I'll leave this open to the panel, you can step in. What are the key steps of building a trust culture in both established and startups?
Yeah, I'll have a crack at that, probably from some of my time prior to SAP, as well as being part of an established organization. It's probably consistent with a number of my answers I've given before, which is that, this really is about humanity. And so while I often talk about indoor-outdoor flow, I think ultimately it's difficult for any organization to have a genuinely great customer experience without having a genuinely great employee experience. Because people are carriers, they carry vision, they carry viruses, right? And you can have the most articulate salesperson in the world, dressed immaculately, highly experienced in a room, delivering a value proposition beautifully. But if they don't believe it, there's just something that triggers in the human sitting on the other side of the table that's just not quite authentic. They don't quite know why they're not buying into it, but they're not buying into it. We've all had that experience, right? But we're not quite engaged in a conversation or with someone, but we don't quite know why. And the opposite applies, where someone who's, perhaps not as smooth, perhaps doesn't dress as sharply, maybe English isn't the first language, but they're passionate about the message they're delivering, and that has that authenticity and that warmth and that human connection that's attached to that. So that sort of plays out both internally and externally. I think ultimately trust, Camilla mentioned it, and I think it's really baked into a lot of Luke's commentary as well, is it's about the act of service. Leadership is about an act of service. And so when you are serving, whether it's your people or your customers, and you build that inherent safety, and there were those couple of references I made before around structural assurance and situational normality, that creates the safety that humans need to feel they can trust, because it's ultimately something that's confronting, and you need to be prepared to put yourself out there a little to trust, right? So creating those safety environments is really important, whether you're dealing with customers or whether you're dealing with staff. And what we've seen in recent times is the rise of a lot of talk about employee experience, and that whole subject's been very closely connected now to customer experience because of that interconnectedness. And so culture, again, is the thing that enables people to carry vision and carry hope and carry the message in an authentic way, irrespective of the skill sets that wrap around it. That authenticity in a world that's so cluttered with noise now is often the thing that cuts through. So I think it's a great question.
Thank you. Good answer too. Okay, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, thank you for joining us and for your involvement. It's been a fascinating discussion, I think. We're getting to the end of the webinar, but stay with us just a little bit longer. In just a few minutes' time, our panelists are going to be giving you a key piece of advice to go away with. So I think you will agree that we've covered a whole spectrum of stuff today, and the good news is the recording of the webcast will be circulated to registered attendees over the next few days. Also, there's a detailed white paper, The Trust Dividend, How Foundational, Experiential and Reputational Trust is Critical to Customer Experience, and that's available for download from the SAP and Which 50 websites. So let's get to those final words, shall we? Panelists, what's your key piece of advice around trust for our audience to take away? Start with you, Camilla.
Okay, so I think the first is probably what we touched on earlier, which is do not expect people to trust you from what you say. Always make it deeds rather than words, and expect to take time to earn that trust as a brand. Build your brand into how you operate, build trust into your culture and how you actually operate on a day-to-day basis, and that will engender trust in your audience. A key part of that, which is possibly contradictory, is do not trust individuals. This is contentious, but I would argue that we owe it to consumers, and what we're seeing in next generation companies is actually different business models. So do not rely on people being Mother Teresa and doing something because it's the right thing. History tells us that they won't. There are bad apples everywhere. Instead, build a business model, and I think this is what appeals to the next generation, is a business model where the benefits of the customer are built into the success of the company. In other words, there is a win-win model that ensures that the customer is protected regardless. If they can see that, if they know that if they win, you win, then they never have to trust. It's a far sort of smaller leap of faith for them. So that might be a little bit contentious, but I would say build trust into what you're doing, not what you're saying.
Great advice. Luke Shaw, what's your final piece of advice?
Well, that's far more eloquent than I would say it, but it's along the same lines. I think you need to be honest in what you can deliver and actually deliver on what you say you will. That incremental and ongoing positive change is a good thing, but it's that consistent action, living that, walking that talk, and it's the action that people see and believe and ultimately trust. And so being consistent in that action is key to this trust discussion.
Thanks, Luke. Aaron, your final word.
I'll keep it very simple, Mike. I think keep it human. Keep it human. Focus on the basics of meeting people's core expectations all day, every day.
Short and sweet, I love it. And that really is it. Our thanks to Camilla Cooke, Luke Shaw, and Aaron Spinley for their outstanding contributions today. And I don't say that lightly. I've done a few of these webinars, and I think this has been one of the better webinars I've done. It's been quite fascinating. I'm Mike G. On behalf of SAP and Which 50, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to leave you with this thought that SAP CEO Bill McDermott wrote in a recent article, Mind the Gap, the Trust/Experience Paradox, that the right way and the only way to restore trust is to put people first, and not with slogans. He wants a profound change in the way institutions engage with individuals. McDermott says, and I quote, "In the experience economy, 7 billion consumers are in the driver's seat like never before. Emotion drives behavior, loyalty, satisfaction. People make buying decisions based on a range of factors, not just price. We embrace brands that embody our dreams and shun those that fall short. This has serious repercussions for organizations of all shapes and sizes." And that's something to think about. This webinar has been a Which 50 presentation and production in association with SAP. Until next time, goodbye from all of us, and thank you.